My name is Alara June Whitfield. I'm 35 years old, and last December, my family decided my children were too young to be considered family. It wasn't phrased that way, not exactly. It came wrapped in my mother's efficient December tone, like she was juggling seat charts for a charity gala and not just Christmas dinner. Your kids don't need to come this year, she said. It's adults only. There was a laugh on the line, my brother's, low and smug and familiar. Exactly, he added, like a punchline to a joke he'd told long before I picked up. They don't belong at the table. I looked at the twinkle lights I'd never taken down from the kitchen window, their soft gold reflected in the black glass. Behind me, the dishwasher clicked into its drying cycle, and the apartment air smelled faintly like clementines and dust. I said, all right, and hung up before my voice could become something I'd have to apologize for later. Dan, my boyfriend, was in the hallway with a laundry basket hooked on his hip, listening without trying to. That was your mom, he said, not a question. Adults only, I said, kids excluded. He didn't say maybe they didn't mean it. He didn't say give them the benefit of the doubt. He set the basket down, walked into the kitchen, and leaned against the counter close enough that I could see the tiny white scar by his left eyebrow, a souvenir from a 7th grade skateboard. Then we're not going, he said. No drama. Just clarity, the kind that makes the air feel colder and cleaner all at once. Here's what my family never quite understood. Silence isn't surrender. Sometimes silence is a ledger. For years, I let them count me as the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who would understand that budgets were tight and tempers were tradition. I didn't flash anything they could measure. No designer labels, no photos from rooftop bars, no ring for them to appraise. They missed the part where quiet can hold an ocean, and I'd learned to swim in it. I had planned gifts this year, real gifts, the kind that take forethought and listening. Limited edition Lego sets for my brother's twins, a silk scarf my mother once pretended was too good for her when she thought no one was watching, a signed baseball for my father, who always said sports were just noise, until his voice changed during the 9th inning. And for my brother, because I am the kind of fool who plans surprises for people who laugh at my children, an engraved smartwatch. The real one, not the knockoff he pretended not to covet. That night, I pulled everything from the hall closet where I'd hidden the wrapped boxes like small, beating animals. The cool paper rasped beneath my fingers. Dan didn't ask what we were doing. He grabbed his coat. We drove across town to a shelter with a blue, flickering open sign that made the frost on the sidewalk glow electric. Inside, a woman with tired eyes and a Christmas sweater that had survived more than one December took our names and then our breath away by not acting surprised. We got a mom with 2 boys, she said, scanning the labels. 7 and 4. The numbers startled me like deja vu. These, I said, touching the Lego sets, for them. Her mouth trembled in a way that made me feel both gentler and angrier than I had all day. When we left, the automatic door hesitated, then slid open with a sigh, like it was tired of watching people weigh generosity against pride. On the ride home, Dan drove with one hand on the wheel and the other on my knee, an anchor disguised as a gesture. The city passed in glassy streaks, bridges, steam grates, a couple dragging a Christmas tree wrapped so tight it looked like something kidnapped. At a red light, he said, "You okay?" And I said, "I'm not sad." It startled me to realize it was true. Later, when the apartment was dark and our building had settled into the hum of a night that belonged to other people's parties, I lay awake and listened to the radiator tick like a metronome. A line I'd heard months earlier drifted up, a line I'd dismissed because it came from a person I had no reason to like, Sienna, Dan's ex-girlfriend. We'd met exactly once, by accident, the day she returned a book Dan had lent her and pretended not to keep. She looked at me with the unfriendly curiosity of someone who remembers being the main character and said to Dan, "Careful with families that measure love in receipts." It wasn't meant for me, but it lived in my head like a splinter anyway. Christmas morning was snow quiet and pancake warm. The kids didn't know they'd been excluded. They knew snowman-shaped pancakes and cocoa with too many marshmallows and the gravity of being allowed to open one small gift before breakfast because I said so. Music from the speaker made the kitchen feel like a movie that had decided not to be sad. At exactly 9:01 a.m., my phone buzzed. My mother's name lit the screen. No greeting, no emojis, No punctuation. Just verdict. They're crying. Where are the gifts? I stared long enough to feel the heat of shame try to climb into my throat. Then I typed, "You said it was adults only." I didn't add Merry Christmas because I am done giving people ribbon for their knives. No response. The quiet felt like a clean hallway in a house I hadn't realized was mine to keep. When you make a decision like that, clean, final, definitive, some part of you waits for the recoil. For the moment, the universe remembers you are small and drags you back into place. It didn't come. Not then. Not when we spent the afternoon building a fort in the living room and the kids declared it a castle. And Dan, grinning, asked for a password we kept changing. Not when I stepped on a Lego and swore in a whisper I hoped the kids wouldn't learn. Not when the sun lowered itself onto the neighboring rooftops and turned every window into a gold coin. It came 2 days later, in the shape of my mother's number lighting up my screen again and again, and then my brother's text arriving with the same grace he'd shown on the phone. "Real mature move, Ilara. Hope your kids enjoyed those Lego sets meant for mine." I showed Dan. He shook his head and said nothing because sometimes the kindest thing a person can do is refuse to narrate what you already know. I didn't reply, not because I didn't have words, but because anything I sent would be an invitation to a room I had finally walked out of. What my family didn't know, couldn't know because they never asked, was that love had been expensive for me, and not just in December. I had quietly covered what they called tight months for 5 years. $600, like clockwork. I labeled it in my bank app as utilities because the truth felt like a light I wasn't ready to turn on. The payment sat there every month like a small tax on the version of me they preferred. Helpful, quiet, grateful. That week I canceled it. No ceremony, no speech. Just a line severed, like a cable cut in a wall you plan to knock down. On New Year's Eve, my parents sent an invitation to dinner, dressed up as diplomacy. "We should talk," my mother wrote, as if the problem had been scheduling all along. Dan asked if I wanted to go. "Yes," I said, and this time I recognized the steadiness in my voice. Not to make peace, to tell the truth. Before we left, I took the small white envelope from the kitchen drawer where I'd begun to save proof of my life, the notes you keep for yourself when you suspect someone will one day insist you imagined everything. Dan slid the envelope into his jacket pocket without asking what was inside. "Password?" he asked the kids at the door, because routines are rituals, and rituals are a way to say, "Your home is safe," without spooking the gods. They shouted something that sounded like marshmallow thunder, and we let that be the benediction that saw us into the cold. As we walked to the car, snow squeaked under our boots. The sky was low and heavy, like a ceiling that had been painted too many times and was starting to bow. I thought of the engraved watch, tucked into the closet the night I decided not to wrap it after all. I thought of my brother's laugh on the phone. I thought of my mother's text at 9:01 a.m. and how fast entitlement runs when it's scared. We were 15 minutes late on purpose. Some latenesses are apologies. This one was intent. My mother opened the door wearing the smile she saves for neighbors and delivery drivers. Tight, tidy, decorative as a bow you plan to throw away after the photo. The house smelled like cinnamon and something scorched. In the living room, the TV glowed with a bowl game my father pretended not to care about as he watched it, and my brother sat at the dining table with his arms crossed and his jaw set like he'd been practicing being unbothered. "Traffic?" my mother asked, already walking back toward the kitchen. "Snow," I said, hanging my coat. Dan brushed his hand against my elbow the way he does in strange rooms, his quiet version of "I'm here." We sat. The table had the old runner with the wine stain she'd never admitted was hers. There were water glasses, no wine. The fork tine marks in the wood caught the overhead light like small constellations. My father cleared his throat. My brother stared at the TV from a chair that didn't face it. My mother did that thing where she smooths an invisible wrinkle from a napkin that doesn't need it. "We should talk about Christmas," she said. "You banned my children from a family holiday," I said. "What would you like to discuss?" Her mouth formed the O of surprise people use when they step on the truth in the dark. "It came out wrong," she said. "We meant a peaceful evening. Adults. Less chaos." In the kitchen, a timer beeped. No one moved to turn it off. My brother's laugh was a slow leak. "So you donated everybody's gifts," he said, as though he was reading off a charge sheet. "Real generous." It was, I said, and watched the timer continue to count a thing already over. Someone else's kids had a good Christmas morning. He looked at my hands, then the envelope Dan had placed by my water glass like it was an extra place setting. What's that? The thing after the timer, I said, and picked it up. Dan slid it closer, the motion small and certain. But first, I want to be very clear. I'm not here to argue about semantics. I'm here to change a pattern. My father blinked slowly, a man trying to stay still while a train moves. Ilara, he said, no one is trying to hurt anyone. You did, I said, and my voice didn't rise so no one could pretend it was hysteria. And you can stop calling it a misunderstanding. It was a choice. You chose to value a quiet table over your grandchildren. You chose to laugh, and you chose to text me at 9:01 asking for gifts you assumed belonged to you. You see, my brother said to the air, she's making it about respect. It was logistics. I turned to him. He had my father's eyes and my mother's timing. Do you want logistics? I asked, and the room exhaled at once, the way a room does when it realizes the storm will not pass around it. I opened the envelope. Inside were printed statements, 5 years of them, each line the same number at the end, $600. I placed them on the table one by one, quiet as cards in a trick you can't argue with. Dan didn't watch the pages. He watched my face. For 60 months, Shomei said. On the first of the month, I transferred $600 to your account. I looked at my parents. You told me times were tight, that the apartment was more than you'd factored, that Dad wasn't picking up as many shifts. I pressed my finger on the top page so it wouldn't curl. I covered it. No lectures, no receipts taped to your door, no announcements at Thanksgiving about who brought what. I did it because I could, and because I believed in a version of us where care didn't need a stage. My mother's hand went to her pearls, a reflex more than a habit. You should have told us, she said, soft as a bruise. Why? I asked. So you could decide what the help meant I owed you? My father leaned forward, elbows on the table. He'd always corrected us for bumping. His voice tried for tender and landed on bewildered. You paid our rent? He said. All this time? I nodded, and on December 26th I canceled it. I let that settle. The timer on the stove finally stopped. The silence after was almost respectful. My brother scoffed. So you want a medal? No, I said. I want my children at the table. Barring that, I want a boundary. This, I tapped the stack, was not leverage. It was love. You turned it into leverage when you treated my family like an inconvenience and my generosity like a subscription. My mother stared down at the papers, like they'd been written in a language she used to know. We were going to talk about that, she said, after the holidays. You texted me for toys, I said. Not to ask how we were, not to apologize, not to say we missed the kids' little faces. You wanted your morning to go like it always went. You wanted me to make it easy to pretend you hadn't changed the rules. I turned to my brother. And you? He looked up, ready with a smirk he'd ironed flat over the years. I didn't give him the pleasure of being the clever one. There was something for you, I said. Something bigger than Legos. A surprise I spent time on, money on, thought on. His eyebrows rose in a parody of interest. A reliable used car, I said, letting the words hit the wood between us. Clean title, arranged, test-driven. The seller was holding it for me until Christmas Eve. I was going to give you the keys in a red envelope. He laughed, but it was the kind of laugh with roots dangling. Sure you were. Ask Dan, I said. He went with me. Dan nodded once, and the nod meant there are facts, and I am not afraid of them. I canceled that too, when you laughed into the phone about my children not belonging at the table. I walked away. The seller relisted it and sold it to someone who doesn't confuse cruelty for humor. My brother's face didn't fall. It slackened, which is different. It is a moment where a person realizes the math is no longer imaginary. My mother touched his wrist like she could rewind him. Let's calm down, she said to the room. We're getting carried away. We haven't started, I said. The TV in the living room changed its brightness, a commercial for something loud and necessary. My father looked at Dan as if he might be the interpreter he'd been waiting for. Dan only met his eyes, steady, polite, unmovable as a lamppost. I could feel my heart, not racing but present, finally clocking its own steps. This is the part where you tell me I've changed, I said to my mother. where you say money made me arrogant and Dan made me cold, and that I'm punishing you for one comment you didn't mean. She flinched, which would have been honest if it had come from the right place. You used to be so kind, she said, so forgiving. I am kind, I said. I am forgiving. Those two words do not mean available for disrespect. My father inhaled, a sound like a chair pulled back. We're your parents, he said, the first time he'd reached for a title like it was a shield. I know, I said, and let the ache live where it needed to. And I am a mother. I looked at the empty chairs where my children would not sit in this house. I don't teach them generosity by letting them watch me accept contempt. We sat with that. The house ticked. Somewhere the heat clicked on and the vents whispered. My mother's eyes shone the way her eyes shine when a neighbor brings lemon bars. Performance-grade gratitude. If you had told us about the rent, she said, we would have thanked you properly. We could have planned. You did plan, I said, for my silence. My brother pushed his chair back, the scrape intentional. Fine, he said. You win Christmas. You get to feel righteous. But don't act surprised when you need this family and we remember how this felt. I turned to him. You already remembered how it felt, I said. That's why you laughed. He looked briefly, like a boy who'd been told his trick was obvious. My father stood, as if to end the scene by changing his altitude. What happens now? He asked. What happens now, I said, gathering the statements back into a neat deck, is simple. I will not be covering your rent anymore. I will not be attending holidays where my children are selectively uninvited. I will not explain myself to relatives who only appear when there's a performance to applaud. You can't just cut us off, my mother said, voice small and mean at the same time. You did, I said, when you told me my kids didn't belong at the table. Dan stood with me. Small movement, large meaning. He set the envelope back in his jacket, like you do with a document you might need again if anyone tries to tell you your memory is a liar. My father's face softened into something that might have been grief if it had been allowed. My mother's hand stayed on my brother's wrist, pulse to pulse like she could transfer sense by osmosis. At the door, my mother called after us, her voice bright and brittle, the way glass sounds right before it becomes a story. Alara, she said, be reasonable. I turned. The foyer mirror held 4 versions of the scene, and none of them looked like family. I am, I said, for the first time in years. Outside, the snow had turned to a dry glitter that sifted down without commitment. In the car, the heater made a soft roar. Dan didn't touch my hand this time. I didn't need him to. We drove in a quiet that wasn't empty. It was wide. Halfway home, he said, proud of you, in the voice you save for the moment, after the plane lands and the wheels really catch. At a red light, a family crossed in front of us. 2 kids in puffed coats, a mother carrying a foil pan, a father laughing into the cold. It didn't make me ache. It made me certain. When we got home, the kids were asleep on the couch under the blanket with the ridiculous penguins. I stood and watched them breathe while Dan paid the sitter and thanked her twice. In the kitchen, I opened the bank app and looked at the scheduled payments that had defined 5 years of my adult life. Nothing there now but the light of the screen and my reflection in it, pale and clear and not sorry. I made tea. Dan leaned in the doorway and said, "Next step?" I thought of January and the way it always felt like a dare. "Let's see who we are," I said, "when I stop paying to be tolerated." He nodded like a vow. The radiator ticked. The building held. I didn't wait for anyone to call. By the first week of January, the calls slowed, but the noise didn't. Silence from my mother always came in another form, through other people. Old friends of hers bumped into me at the grocery store, asking how the family meeting went. My aunt left a voicemail quoting Proverbs about honoring thy parents, which I'm pretty sure she'd never opened a Bible to find herself. And then, one afternoon, my cousin Lena called from out of state. "Elara," she said, voice tight with curiosity she thought was concern. "I just wanted to check in. I heard some stories." I stirred my coffee, watching the swirl like a storm viewed from space. "Let me guess," I said. "I'm arrogant now, and Dan turned me into someone ungrateful." She hesitated. "Something like that. Your mom said you've changed, that you cut them off out of nowhere." "Out of nowhere." I almost laughed. "Did she also mention the 5 years of rent payments, I asked. Lena went quiet for a full 5 seconds. "No," she said softly. "But she did mention your brother selling some things online. My friend bought a watch off Facebook Marketplace last week, engraved with your initials. EJW. My heart dropped. I hadn't told anyone about that watch. I still had the receipt tucked in the drawer under the spare batteries. It was the one gift that had never made it to the shelter. "You're sure?" I asked. "Positive. She showed it to me because she thought it was sweet." Said the seller looked nervous when she asked who EJW was. I thanked her, hung up, and just sat there. Dan came in from the porch, brushing snow from his sleeves. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I showed him the photo Lena had sent. The watch face glinting under kitchen light, the engraving unmistakable. His jaw clenched. "He stole it." "From my car," I said. "The night I dropped off the old decorations before Christmas, I left it unlocked. I didn't even think to check." Dan's eyes darkened. "You want me to call him?" "No," I said. "I will." The phone rang twice. My brother answered on the third ring, casual, like he'd been waiting. "Hey, sis? You have my watch." A pause, then a sigh. "Oh, that. It was just sitting there. I figured you weren't going to give it to me anyway." "You stole from me," I said, steady but cold. He laughed under his breath. "You weren't going to use it. What's the difference?" "The difference," I said, "is that now I know exactly who you are." And I hung up, blocked his number. The sound of the call ending was so final it felt ceremonial. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel anger the way I expected. It was cleaner than that, like pulling out a splinter you'd been living with so long you'd forgotten the ache wasn't normal. Dan found me at the kitchen table, laptop open, spreadsheets glowing. "What are you doing?" "Math," I said. He smiled carefully. "That's usually my line." I turned the screen so he could see. I had listed every dollar I'd spent on my family in the last 5 years. Rent, gifts, flights, surprise bills I'd covered, last-minute loans that were never repaid. When I totaled it, the number looked unreal, almost $50,000. Dan whistled low. "That's half a house." "Exactly," I said. "So we're going to spend it like it's ours." He frowned. "Meaning?" "Every dollar I used to spend on them, we redirect it. To us, to the kids, to our house, to things that matter." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "What about guilt?" "I'm tired of buying guilt and calling it love." We spent the next hour reworking our budget, laughing in disbelief at how much lighter the numbers felt. For the first time, money didn't represent survival. It represented peace. After we finished, Dan poured 2 glasses of wine. "So, what's next?" "Nothing," I said. "That's the point." He smiled, slow and proud. "You know, Sienna once told me something." I froze. It wasn't that her name hurt. It was that it surprised me to hear it said out loud after so long. "What did she say?" "That I was good at rescuing people who didn't want to be saved." And I told her maybe I just hadn't met the right kind of person yet. I tilted my head. "Meaning me?" He smiled. "Meaning someone who doesn't need rescuing. Just someone who deserves peace." For a moment, I let that land. He wasn't the man Sienna left anymore, and I wasn't the daughter who kept paying to stay in a family that didn't want her children in the room. We sat there, surrounded by the hum of our quiet apartment, the kids asleep, the air finally still. It felt like standing in the eye of a storm after years of wind. 2 days later, an email arrived from my father. Subject: a favor. He wrote that the rent was overdue, that my mother was stressed, and that if I could just help this month, he'd pay me back soon. He ended it with, "You know how your mom gets when things are tight." I read it twice, then a third time, until the words stopped vibrating with memory and just looked like text on a screen. They didn't get it. They still thought this was temporary, like I was a child having a tantrum who'd eventually cool off. Dan saw the email over my shoulder. "You gonna answer?" "Not yet," I said. "I don't want to reply while my heart's still soft." He nodded. "I can draft something if you want." "No," I said. "I already have it in my head. I just need time to mean it." For 3 days, I let the email sit there. Every time I walked past my laptop, it glowed at me like an open wound. But by the third night, I wasn't angry anymore. I was certain. I opened a blank reply and started typing. "Dad, I won't be covering the rent anymore. I need to prioritize my own family. I hope things work out for you." That was it. No bitterness, no apologies, just boundaries written in plain text. I hit send, closed the laptop, and felt something leave my chest that I didn't know was still inside. 2 days later, my phone rang again. The number was unfamiliar. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. "Ilara? It's Lena again," my cousin said. "I thought you should know. Your mom's telling people you've gone cold, that Dan's poisoned you against your own family." "Of course she is," I said, half laughing. "She also said," Lena continued, hesitant, that you're refusing to help while your parents are in financial trouble. She's making it sound like you abandoned them. I looked at the coffee table, at the Lego castle still half built from the kids' latest project, one tower leaning like it was learning how to stand. They abandoned me first, I said quietly. Lena sighed. I figured. I just thought you should hear it from someone who doesn't believe it. Thank you, I said. I appreciate it. After we hung up, Dan came over, wrapped his arms around me, and whispered, You did the right thing. I know, I said, surprising myself again with the calm in my voice. But they're not done yet. He pulled back, eyebrows raised. You think they'll push harder? They always do, I said. When the money stops flowing, they start drowning, and they'll call it love. I didn't know then how right I was, because within a month they'd find a new way to reach me. Not through guilt or gossip or phone calls this time, but through paper, the kind written in my mother's looping cursive and sealed with a stamp heavy enough to sound like a warning when it hit the mailbox. And that letter, more than anything they'd ever said, would prove how far they were willing to go to pull me back. The envelope arrived in early February. Heavy, cream-colored, no return address. My name written across the front in my mother's perfect cursive, the same handwriting that used to label my school lunches and later my report cards, before it started writing guilt in loops. Dan found it first. He set it on the kitchen counter like it might explode. Do you want me to open it? He asked. I shook my head. If I read it, at least they can't twist what I imagined it said. He nodded, understanding the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from second-guessing manipulation. I waited a full day before opening it. When I finally did, the paper smelled faintly of perfume, the kind she wore when I was a child. For a second, I saw her the way I used to, standing by the mirror, humming off key while she fastened earrings, telling me that presentation was everything. The letter began tender, too tender. Alara, I still remember the time you got lost at the museum when you were 9. I was frantic. I prayed out loud. I begged God to bring you back to me. When I found you near the gift shop, I promised I'd never take my eyes off you again. The memory hit harder than I wanted it to, but the next paragraph was the pivot I'd expected. That's why it hurts so much to see the woman you've become. Cold, distant, cruel. You've embarrassed this family. You've allowed a man to harden your heart. I stopped there. It was almost impressive how predictably the letter unraveled, from nostalgia to accusation in a single breath. By the last page, she was quoting scripture about forgiveness and signing it with "Love always, Mom." No apology, no acknowledgement, just guilt dressed in poetry. Dan came in from the living room, saw the look on my face, and didn't need to ask. Burn it, he said. I nodded. He lit a match, held the corner of the paper to it, and watched it curl into ash in the sink. We didn't say a word. The smoke smelled like old perfume and lies. The next week, a new message came, but this time, not from her. It was an email from the landlord of my parents' building. He wrote politely, Mrs. Whitfield gave me your address and said you've always handled their payments. Rent has been overdue since January. Could you confirm the transfer date or let me know how you'd like to proceed? Attached an invoice, $9,800, due immediately. My hands went cold. Dan looked over my shoulder, reading the message aloud in disbelief. She gave him your email? Told him you handle their rent? She's trying to pull me back in, I said, through paperwork. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was control, using bureaucracy as a leash. I called the landlord directly. Sir, I said, voice even, I don't have financial power of attorney. I'm not responsible for that lease. Please remove my contact information from your file. He sighed, the way someone sighs when they've seen this before. You're not the first child to get pulled into their parents' bills, he said. I'll handle it. You take care of yourself. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table until the tea went cold. Dan finally broke the silence. They'll keep finding ways, Alara. You know that, right? I do, I said, which is why we need to move. He froze. Move? Yes, out of state. Somewhere they can't just drop by. Can't use my address for their emergencies. He studied me, half smile forming slowly. You've already looked at listings, haven't you? I smiled back. 2, actually. That night, we stayed up late, scrolling through homes in quiet towns with trees and good schools, and the kind of silence you can live inside. For every place we bookmarked, I felt my chest loosen another inch. By March, we'd chosen 1, 2 counties away, enough distance to breathe without looking over our shoulders. We didn't tell anyone, not even Lena at first. We packed gradually, quietly. Every night after the kids went to bed, we boxed memories while whispering like fugitives. By June, we were gone. No goodbye post, no family announcement, no forwarding address. The movers came at dawn. By sunset, the only thing left in the old apartment was an echo and a faint ring where the couch had sat too long. The new house smelled like pine and possibility. Big windows, a yard where the kids could chase light without hitting walls of judgment. The first night there, we ate pizza on the floor, laughing as if laughter had been waiting for us in the boxes. When the kids fell asleep, Dan and I stood outside under the porch light. He took my hand. "You realize," he said, "we're free." I exhaled, feeling the air go all the way down this time. Yes, and it feels terrifyingly good. Over the next few weeks, the peace settled in, like dust on sunbeams. The kids adjusted faster than I did. New school, new friends, new rooms. Dan set up his home office. I started a small consultancy from the spare bedroom. We didn't post about it. We didn't owe anyone the story. By July, we started to believe the quiet might last. Until one afternoon, a small white box appeared on our doorstep. No name, no sender. Inside, a photo album. Every page filled with pictures from my childhood. Birthdays, holidays, vacations. But in every photo, where Dan appeared, someone had taken a black marker and crossed out his face. In some, they'd scribbled over the kids too. At the very end of the album, there was a note written in that same looping cursive. "You used to belong to us. Now you belong to her." Dan came into the room, saw it open on my lap, and froze. "Alara," I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I picked up the album, walked outside, and dropped it straight into the trash bin. Then I came back in, poured myself a glass of wine, and said, "They're spiraling." He nodded slowly. "They're losing control." "Good," I said. "Let them." That night we sat together on the porch. No music, no words, just crickets and air. The kids slept upstairs, dreaming their new dreams. The world outside felt wide again, like it had been waiting for us. It took years for me to learn this truth. You can't heal in the same place that hurt you. And sometimes the only closure you get is the sound of the door clicking shut behind you. By September, the air had changed. The mornings came cooler, sharper. The kids ran to catch the bus under trees that looked like they'd been painted overnight. Life had found rhythm again. Breakfasts that didn't start with tension, nights that ended in laughter instead of apology. The silence that once felt foreign now sounded like safety. Then, one morning, I checked my inbox and saw it. Subject: Dad's sick. Sent from my brother. No greeting. No details. Just 2 words meant to dig where the guilt still might live. I stared at it for a long time, then I hit delete. No hesitation, no rush of remorse. Just peace. The kind that comes when you finally understand the difference between love and obligation. That afternoon, I took the kids to the coast. Dan packed sandwiches and the same old checkered blanket we'd had since our first apartment. We sat in the sand, watching the waves fold over themselves. The kids built crooked castles that collapsed faster than they could rebuild them, and for once, no one asked me to fix it. Over dinner that night, with the soft crash of the ocean still in our ears, Dan looked at me and asked quietly, "You okay?" I smiled. "Yeah, more than okay." He nodded, searching my face. "When you saw that email, did it hurt?" I took a breath, thinking. "It tried to," I said, "but it didn't reach." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. "Then we're really done, aren't we?" I met his eyes. "We didn't cut ties, Dan. We just stopped bleeding for people who kept holding the knife." The words hung there between us, soft but final. We both knew it was true. In the weeks that followed, I caught myself waiting for something. Another letter, another manipulation, disguised as concern. But nothing came. Just the sound of our own lives, steady and whole. In October, Dan's business picked up. My consultancy grew faster than I expected. The kids decorated pumpkins on the porch, their laughter echoing into the street. When the younger one asked if Grandma and Grandpa would visit for Halloween, I hesitated, then said simply, "No, sweetheart. They live far away now." And she just nodded, unconcerned, and went back to carving. Children have a way of accepting what adults complicate. One evening, Dan brought home a small gift, a worn guitar he'd found in a thrift shop. "You used to play," he said. I brushed the dust from the strings, strummed once, and felt the vibration hum through the quiet house. It was out of tune, imperfect, but alive, like me. Later that night, we sat on the couch. Dan glanced toward the window, where the wind pushed at the curtains. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Before we left, I almost called Sienna." I looked up, surprised. "Why?" He exhaled. Not because I missed her, because I thought she'd understand what it felt like to lose family. I didn't know how to hold all that anger and still be decent. I nodded. And did you call her? He shook his head. No, because I realized I didn't want understanding. I wanted peace, and I already had that. Here. I reached over, lacing my fingers through his. Good answer, I said softly. The next morning, the sunrise slipped through the blinds in thin golden lines. The kids clattered down the stairs, half-dressed for school, arguing over whose turn it was to pack the snacks. Dan kissed me on the forehead before rushing out for a meeting. The world felt ordinary, and that, I realized, was extraordinary. Months had passed since we'd left the city, but sometimes I still caught myself expecting the phone to buzz with another demand. It never did. I'd spent most of my life waiting to be loved properly by the wrong people. Now I was finally being loved freely by the right ones. That night, I opened a blank document on my laptop. Not for work, not for planning, just to write a single line I didn't want to forget. Peace is what's left when you stop paying rent in someone else's story. I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and stood at the window, watching the wind lift the leaves like confetti. Behind me, the house glowed softly. The hum of the dishwasher, the smell of pumpkin candles, the echo of laughter from down the hall. A life built, not borrowed. I didn't miss them anymore. Not the texts, not the guilt, not even the illusion of belonging. Because I finally understood. Belonging isn't something you beg for, it's something you build. And I had built mine.